Welcome to the Half Glass Podcast, where theology plus technology equals uncertainty, and we can never be quite sure if that glass is half empty or half full. We're back at episode 3.
Number 3.
We've been learning things, investing, just doing the newbie thing, learning how to be podcasters. And I thought the first episodes turned out pretty well for early.
So far, so good, man. But
and we've got one thing I did decide to do the reaction videos that we did on the first 2. I think we're gonna leave those behind. They were fun, but
we're killing them. We're bailing on them.
But I think we have way more traffic on the audio only, and a reaction video is pretty meaningless on that. So let's
without seeing it, yeah, it makes sense.
So what I want to do start with a topic that we mentioned interest in last time, which is Paul Kingsnorth, and I did my best to kind of come up to speed on the guy. I mean, I did watch a speech he made to the First Things crowd, which I thought was really good.
Yeah, he gave the annual I think Erasmus lecture.
Erasmus lecture
in New York.
I watched that, and it was great. I mean, the guy's a great storyteller, and he very, very eloquent, right? And I could
erudite dude.
Yes. So because you're I don't want to say a bigger fan of him than I just don't know him very well. So bring me up to speed. Give me Dave's take on Kingsnorth. Paul Kingsnorth.
Okay, so to be clear, I'm not an expert on him or anything, but I found out about him a little while back. He's got a Substack. I forget the name of it. We can put it in the show notes or whatever. But he writes, and he's got a crazy background. He was raised in England. His short bio, raised in England, and kind of Anglican, kind of not, like most people in England are, post-Christian or whatever, and became a radical activist, environmentalist guy, was a poet, an author. He's written novels, I think science fiction novels. And his story is these kind of a guy who's always interested in religion, in the spiritual things. He became a Wicca pagan guy, Buddhist. He's always been a searcher. And he would say he's kind of Christ haunted, which is to say he felt this call back to God, religion. Anyway, and so his whole story is now he's an Orthodox Christian, a devout Eastern Orthodox, I think Romanian Orthodox. But yeah, and he's just he's kind of grabbed attention of some in the church because of his really, I think, helpful and honest critiques. He's not a theologian, so he's not trained, right? Which is good. Sometimes you need someone who's not trained to speak prophetically. And I would say that's about this dude, which sounds weird, but this dude is prophetic, I think, in the sense that he speaks saliently and helpfully about how we as Christians and as the church should look with kind of a critical eye at technology. Now, he goes extreme places in it. So the guy's name is Kingsnorth. You can Google it and check it out. And in this lecture, it's the culmination of his thinking over the past several years. And he kind of articulates in no uncertain terms, Western civilization, as much as we may love it, really any civilization should be held on with a loose hand as a Christian, and that our home is not here, but our home is in heaven. And so he waxes poetically on this, and his central argument is all the technologies of the world, from cars to the internet to now artificial intelligence to whatever it is, we just need to be really careful about what we jump into and what we don't jump into. And this dude is inclined to read the monastics of the early church and be a desert father kind of a guy. Sure. So he would, be content, I think, and with his environmentalist background, he'd be content to live in a cave maybe. But so I don't think that's practical nor appropriate always. But I just read him, man, and saw that lecture, and it just blew me away. And I've just been jumping into his stuff for the past maybe year now, honestly, full scale. So it's hard for us, especially Protestant Lutherans, to understand some of the stuff he's saying, because he does articulate it in a different way than our tradition. But I find it helpful, man. Super helpful.
Well, when you say what do you think that an average, say, Lutheran listener to us would find hard to understand
with Kingsnorth?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, his tendency to elevate and aggrandize the monastic tradition, years ago, Roger wrote that book, The Benedict Option, And I remember some of the responses of Lutheran clergy and Lutheran lay people were like, well, we solved the monastic problem in the Reformation, right? monks are bad, right? And so get rid of that, get married, find your Catherine von Bora, and move on. And we're not huge fans, Lutherans by and large, of the monastic tradition. So that would be a thing I think that might be an issue. And just he's like Kierkegaard, in the sense that he critiques the church kind of from within, but more than Kierkegaard. Kierkegaard, I think, was kind of on the outs. But he critiques it in such a way that you just are like, wow, it's so cutting and biting that I think some people would find it offensive at times. Like he says this one quote in one of his things. He says, we all know our calling as Christians. We're called, and he's talking about the irrationality, the upside down nature of Christianity. Like, how do we in the modern world, in our lectionary church, we've been reading the Beatitudes. Like, how do you make sense of this crazy, absurd stuff? To like turn the other cheek. It's just crazy, right? It's impossible Christianity. And he says, we all know the calling of our Lord. He calls us to die, to give away everything that we have. He takes it very literally. And he says, this is the call on our life, but we hate it. And we spend our whole life running away from it. He says these biting critiques like this, that like you hear it, it's like, okay, that sounds very like homiletically kind of cool. But then, the theology of it is, we could talk about that. But just things like that, I think people would find them a bit abrasive, perhaps.
It's interesting, just to react to that one thing. I don't know that Lutherans would be that offended by that.
Good. Go read them.
I feel like our law gospel preaching.
There you go.
To the extent that it's done, I think people sort of get inured to like having impossible demands put on them, because I mean we're so big into saying, well, the real purpose of the law is not to guide your life, but to show you your sin. Yeah. And so I think I'm not crazy about this. I feel like it's a terrible Lutheran tendency, but I think we can just sort of roll with it when someone says, oh, you should give away all your money or whatever. It says, yeah, that's great, I should, but that just shows I'm a sinner. So forgive me.
Yes,
and I'll be back next week.
You're articulating exactly better what I was trying to say here, is that, and it's the truth. Our law gospel paradigm, as much as it is helpful, and we're locked in Lutherans, dude, LCMS, got it. But sometimes, like you just said, you become desensitized to the radical law stuff in the Bible, where it's like, oh, well, it's okay. The end of the Sermon on the Mount is our Lord says, be ye perfect as your Father in heaven is. And we just dismiss it. We say, okay, well, obviously that's a call to an impossible thing. We can't be perfect. I won't even try. Thank God for the gospel. We move on. And it just breeds this antinomianism. I've used
this parable before, where I talk about a young boy coming in from playing outside in the backyard to eat his lunch, and he starts to pick up his sandwich, and his mom just is horrified because his hands are filthy, and said, you need to go wash your hands. You're going to get sick. And he goes, well, Mom, I read in a science textbook that it's impossible to get rid of every germ from underneath your fingernails, no matter how long you wash. So, let's not even bother. And that I feel like sometimes as Lutherans, that's the way we are with sin. It's
totally.
Like, what? I mean, my pastor keeps telling me I'd have to give everything away. I'd have to do this. I'd have to do that in order to like satisfy the law. So why even bother? I mean, just tell God, forgive me. I'm never going to do it.
Yes. I think you're exactly correct. I think that there's some parts of our tradition that you just, laid out pretty clearly. You'd hear Kingsnorth and you'd say, great, another one of these work righteousness guys. And I don't think we've got to stop with that. That's just a straw man, and it's lazy thinking, and it's not helpful at all. Right,
because I think Kingsnorth, he expects to be taken seriously.
Totally.
I mean, I think he wants us to change our behavior, based on what he said, and not just sit there and say, oh yeah, I'm a sinner.
Yeah. So that's some of the reasons why I think some of if there's Lutherans listening that are, that might be a little bit disarmed by some of his stuff.
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah, there is sort of like that. You're not serious, are you?
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. You hear him and like, dude, is this dude for real? Like, come on, like, what do you want us to like live like first century Christians in Acts and give away all of our money and make sure nobody's poor in our community and like have community every day and like live like these weird hippies? And he would say, yes, exactly. And by the way, this is the cool thing about Kingsnorth, which I think I should say is that he came from like a super profoundly pagan background, right? He was raised in England in this kind of, the zeitgeist is Christianity, right? If you've ever been, like, you go to Europe and like, it's like, God is kind of there, they have these great prep schools for all these young boys to go to in England, but they don't really believe it, right? So the Church of England, he would say, is just this kind of dead thing he never even considered. And so he was deeply curious, but he comes to like Orthodox Christianity, and I don't mean big O, but also small o, like real Bible stuff, he comes to it with such a fresh perspective because he's seen the darkness of no faith, the darkness of those other strange religions. And he says, you Christians, like we've got something really cool here. Don't think that the words of Jesus are scary. They're life-giving. Even the ones about selling everything and going and living in the mountains, like the early monks. He's so refreshing, man. I just listen to him and read him, and I'm like, man, that's the kind of stuff if you've been a Christian your whole life, it just charges me up and encourages me. I find it deeply encouraging.
Sure. Well, I could riff on the guy all day. If you present him the way you just presented him, I know part of the podcast is that we have different viewpoints, but I don't think I agree with some of the things Kingsnorth says about technology. But then,
let's talk about that. Let me interrupt you. Let's talk about that because that is another big subtext of his work. I think he would even call himself like a neo-Luddite or whatever, which is to say he's got a flip phone and he's not doing it for show. He really does say in some of his work and in some of his pieces that artificial intelligence, the internet, the advent of all these technologies, right? What do the sociologists say? We've got more growth in the past 25 years of technology exponentially than the past 2,000, 5,000 years combined, right? So something like that. It's crazy, right? And so he would say this is like a net negative, so much that he would say things like, he would say artificial intelligence is borderline demonic and to not trust it and to tend very carefully. And he's made a comment one time, he said artificial intelligence is more dangerous than nuclear bombs. He says because a nuclear bomb can't make a million other nuclear bombs, but an AI can make another million AIs. And he's supposed to make you laugh and wonder, but he's dead serious.
I think it's a serious point. It's a serious point. But I think I find myself in a place where I don't want to dismiss him entirely because I take what he says seriously, but I don't think I take him on his own terms. And that I think that's what I would say. I mean, his own terms are kind of like you said, this maybe a little bit neo-Luddite. Yeah. But I'm not sure he takes himself on his own terms.
Interesting. What do you mean?
And well, I really hate to tell you this, but part of my prep for today, I wanted to learn more. I had watched that lecture, Erasmus lecture, which is really great. And just to you on the podcast,
check it out, dude.
Dave and I both watched it. If you can find it and watch it, it'll be 40 minutes that you'll be happy you spent. Mm-hmm. And just the story he tells of his own conversion is amazing. Is worth the price of admission. So, I love the guy, right, on a personal level. But I also, for my prep, because I didn't have time to read his novels and all this stuff, to come up to speed on everything, I asked my buddy Grok, what do you think of Paul Kingsnorth?
Here we go. And
I said I was going to have a discussion with a friend, and Grok gave a pretty even-handed description of the guy. And I told Grok that the reason I wanted this is I was going to have a friendly discussion with a guy that I'm not sure I'm the same page with about Kingsnorth, and so can you give me some points?
What did the demons say about Kingsnorth?
Well, he made a big deal about Kingsnorth's composting toilet that he uses in his, and he said, where did that composting toilet come from? I mean, would some guy living in the Irish Highlands be able to come up with that on their own? Yeah. I mean, he wants to live with a light footprint, which is admirable. He doesn't want his and his kids' poop, just smelling the place up.
Yeah. And CO2 and all that.
But he relies on plastics, ceramics, technology that is just impossible for someone without a lot of technology to pull off. And a composting toilet, state of the art. Most of our toilets are water closets, right? But,
I'm not surprised Gronk would take a cheap shot like that.
You think it's a cheap shot?
No, I'm just kidding. But it's the classic Rage Against the Machine. There's a band Rage Against the Machine that is punk rock, like the famous punk rock band that starts anti-establishment, that starts sticking it to the man, that starts saying, we're never going to sell out. And then what happens is 1 million people buy their records and they tour the world. And it's like Rage Against the Machine, this famous band or whatever. You can Google them.
Right.
Yeah. And their whole thing is the critique is, I dig that band, by the way. The whole critique is well, you're raging against the machine while you're cashing your $1 million checks all the way to the bank, you sellouts. And so, at a certain point, all of us have some inconsistencies. And I think, to be fair, This dude lives in the 21st century.
He writes on Substack.
Yeah, he writes on Substack, and so there is always the critique of you're anti whatever, but you're letting the whole world know about it through your websites. So I get it, but I do think, so I know what you mean by on his own terms, but I still would say he's doing his best to live a consistent kind of holistic approach.
And I have to say, Grok had more positive things to say about him than negative things. And about how.
By the way, who's Grok for the people listening? Who and what is Grok?
Grok is XAI's, in other words, Elon Musk's AI. It's
Careful.
on version 3, which just rolled out like 2 weeks ago, which is a big
brand
improvement. Big improvement over the other one. And so, it said about Kingsnorth too, and we talked about it, that it was comparing him with what we call eco-tourists.
Sure.
I mean, and I think this was part of the reason why he left. He didn't stop loving the earth.
Yeah.
But he started thinking that the modern environmental movement they were sellouts.
That's a huge part of his story.
During this conversation with Grok, we started talking about people that will fly down to the Amazon and plant trees and like look askance at this poor subsistence farmer, because he cut down at the edge of the thing to try to feed his family.
Yeah.
But meanwhile, they're eating sushi flown in from Japan, right? And they got this gigantic carbon footprint, and and Kingsnorth is calling them out for being hypocrites, which he and I are on the exact same page with that, and that's why I say I'm not sure. I'm not entirely sure that he would even call himself a Luddite, or maybe he does.
I don't know. I may have misspoken if he self-ascribes that, or if that's just superimposed onto him. But he definitely comes across that way if you listen to him and read him. And I'm not sure. When you read him, it's clear. Dude's got a compost toilet, man. The dude is, maybe he's not saying smash the machines, but he's definitely living a life that is reluctant of machines, to be sure.
I think that's a great life.
I agree.
For a lot of us. Anyone that could pull it off. If you love nature, to be close to it and see it every day. Yeah.
And he's an outdoor environmentalist guy. Yeah.
I have another kind of question for you. The other thing that came out that was very interesting is that when we talk about your affection for the guy, is that there are a lot of post-structuralist overtones in Kingsnorth. So if you could reflect on that a little bit, just think about it for a minute and just tell me.
I haven't really, honestly.
But we'll think about it now. If I said that Kingsnorth is a crypto post-structuralist,
I would say define
in a debating thing. Well, okay, just give me a response.
I would say define post-structuralism first of all. What you mean by that, because that can mean a million things. But I would say maybe he is in this line, in this vein of like certainly opposing the big systems, opposing institutions. Post-structuralism can have a lot of definitions, but certainly a part of it is you just can come across like an ungrateful grandchild, right? Which is this. I had a philosophy professor in college say that all the postmoderns are ungrateful grandchildren who've been given everything and now just want to burn it all down. So maybe there is something. I haven't really given it much thought or consideration, but I don't know what his interaction is with, Foucault, Derrida, or all those guys or whatever, but I think certainly you can see a little bit of that in him.
He wasn't a post-structuralist, but Gramsci, his notion of hegemony, is that how you pronounce that?
Yeah, hegemony or hegemony.
That he basically says that the guys that won get to define terms in a way that people can't even see, that they're swimming in a particular cultural thing, a set of cultural assumptions that aren't necessarily true, and people just take them for granted. And it's a huge advantage for the people in charge, right? And I think
to the victor goes the spoils.
I think Kingsnorth would say that. He would say that about sort of the industrial complex, right? Just getting people to accept that you should just that the good life is driving around your car everywhere, and consuming huge amounts of mass-produced things.
Yeah, but see, here's the thing. I think, unironically, to whatever degree he is these things, maybe drawing on some of these philosophical movements, he's doing it, arguing from the New Testament as his like baseline. He's saying, guys, if you're a Christian, you should be skeptical of civilization writ large, which is to say, the civilization is the world. And so all the technologies that we just have accepted and taken on as like a normal part of life, I mean, everything and anything, he says, we should consider that to be almost DNA level, baked into ingredient of world and principalities. And so I would say if he is these things that we're saying, these philosophical kind of underpinnings in him, it's not like he's doing it, from some atheistic, anti-religious perspective. He is deeply Christian, saying, to whatever degree we would accuse him of these things being connected to post-structuralists, he would say, fair enough, but I'm doing it in the name of Jesus, saying that our Lord Jesus actually said, I don't have a home for a reason, and I kind of want to be a wandering rabbi, and that is something we should consider more deeply.
Okay. I mean, I could accept that. And again, I mean, like I said, I like Paul Kingsnorth. I mean, just from the one talk, and I think he raises a lot of great points.
He's just a guy that I think, and he's a part of some other thinkers that are coming up now. These guys that come from other traditions and religions that are, in my mind, helping us think about our own faith in a way that I've never thought about anyway.
Sure. And I want to revisit something now, if it's okay.
Yeah, man, go.
Just something I think we talked about before, and remind me, because unfortunately, and I'll say this for the audience, you and I spend a lot of time off camera gabbing, and so I can't.
Save for the pod,
I can't always remember what we've talked about.
Me neither.
But on the podcast have we talked about Oswald Spengler, The Decline of the West?
Ooh, no, we haven't, dude. Go for it.
All right.
This is your area of expertise.
Spengler is another guy that is even more so than Kingsnorth. Is a guy that I take seriously, but not on his own terms. Mm-hmm. And who
is he? Give us the bio.
Oswald Spengler was a math teacher of all things during sort of the World War I and Weimar era in Germany. Mm-hmm. And he wrote a book in his spare time when he wasn't teaching math students on the rise and fall of civilizations. And he had a taxonomy that he said was determinative. So in other words, all civilizations follow this trajectory, and it's like this immutable law that they're all going to do that. And he spoke of it that way in terms of like this. This is like the law of civilizations.
It's fixed.
And they're just going to do this. And as I read it, I said to myself that he is spot on a lot of his observations, and there are a lot of things I loved that I learned from him reading the book. Like I'd heard of the Oracle of Delphi, but I never really was aware of how economically involved they were in their culture. And so, you always sort of thought of them as sort of like these sort of spiritual gurus that would say stuff, but they were really involved in the economy of their day as well. And so they were definitely, a part of that. And he ties all those threads together and says, look, there's this overall arc of civilization.
Decline of the West is what the book's called, right?
And the book's called The Decline of the West because his main, in showing all this out, his main thesis is that in the early 20th century, that they were living through the end of the civilization that started, what he called the Faustian civilization, that started with the Enlightenment. Yeah. And according to him, the Faustian civilization, it was named after Goethe's greatest work. Mm-hmm. And basically a guy that sold his soul to the devil for knowledge. Yeah. And basically Spengler says that's what the West did with the Enlightenment. It's like nothing matters except us learning more. And I wonder how Kingsnorth would think about that, have a comment on that, that civilization.
I think he's got a lot of comments, and agreement too.
But it's sort of a fascinating take, right? That and this is one of the reasons why it's fun to read Spengler, not because I think he's right in his main thesis, but I think he's right. He was right in observing the decline of the West, but I don't think he was right in his deterministic laws about how civilizations always work.
Well, let me ask you now, right? So you play commentator on Spengler, like, so. I mean, I don't. It's hard to agree that it's like a property that's fixed in nature, that every civilization must follow this paradigm, which I think is what he argues, right?
Yes.
So let's put that to the side for a moment. Let's compartmentalize. And I don't know much about Spengler, just to be clear. I think Francis Fukuyama mentions him in like that book, Last Man or whatever. But I've never read the book myself, but I know about it. So my question is, what do you make of the idea that that we sold our soul during the Enlightenment. And I'll just throw this. So first of all, address that, but then secondarily, as a Lutheran, who our tradition was born in the academy, and who clearly played a part in this shift from pre-modernity to modernity, right? We would all say, like, French Revolution, Martin Luther, some of the people, the Reformation, Renaissance.
Right.
I'm just in my mind, I'm thinking, is there some connection if we grant that there's something bad about the Enlightenment selling our soul to the devil even? And then what does it make of us, the Lutheran academic Reformation born in the university, and how we changed the course of Christian history?
Well, I mean, it's such a huge subject. I mean, I feel like we ought to do like 3 podcasts.
Dude, this is
but let's save it and come back.
Okay.
I mean, because I've thought about this subject a lot, and Lutheranism actually has sort of a fraught relationship with the larger culture, and because in some sense we are an artifact of the Enlightenment.
That's what I'm saying, man. Yeah.
And so, but we hate it. And I mean, it's really kind of an interesting tension, and I think it deserves a lot of consideration, because I think that actually happens way more often than we suppose.
Yeah.
That these kinds of tensions, but I definitely think it's true of Lutheranism that we're an artifact of the Enlightenment, but we're not fans of the Enlightenment.
Yeah, in a way, it goes back to the thing of, is that we're critiquing maybe the fact that we reduce our faith to just this intellectual assent. Sometimes we have a tendency to do that, maybe, and then we push against it, but we push against it with systematic theology. We're in this kind of same Kingsnorthian thing of like, on our own terms, it doesn't even make sense.
Sure.
It's this kind of self-refuting thing. Yeah.
But my personal, to just sort of wrap up, my personal tie when I think about Kingsnorth and Spengler together is that, I mean, Spengler's talking about the death of Western civilization, right, in his talk, and which just ties in like in a really obvious way to Spengler.
Oh, for
he's
sure.
writing The Decline of the West, and so I think that, I mean, that there's that obvious parallel, and I have felt for years that that's exactly where we are. I feel like technology and the geographic isolation of the United States prevents it from being overrun like the Roman Empire would have been by barbarians when it got too weak, to hold itself together. It got to the point where everyone was like doing the same kind of androgynous sex kinks and stuff like that we see today, and they got so obsessed with this, and people just trying to get whatever tax benefits they could out of the government, and just corruption and everything, that the Vandals and the others just came in and just ran over them. I mean, that the Romans from 3 generations earlier would have been shaking their heads, so we would have kicked these guys' butts.
Yeah, they capitalized on the chaos.
They dared attack us.
Yeah.
But I mean, it just fell from within.
Yeah.
And in a lot of ways, I mean, the United States and Western civilization, I mean, it's there. It's like this crumbly thing.
Yeah.
And I remember this quote from Luther. I should probably chase it down with Grok, because I bet I could find it. I don't know exactly. I can't remember exactly where he said it, but he said he was likening himself to a guy taking an axe to a rotten tree, talking about the Church of Rome. And he said the tree was dead, and it said I just put an axe to it. He said, and every spider that was living in it came out to spit at me.
Wow.
And I mean, that was sort of his description of his own life.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's no denying that the Roman Church of Luther's day was in some ways a rotten tree. It had grown very large, but its own internal contradictions and tensions had weakened it.
It was still alive, but it was like rotting, and for sure, rigor mortis was about to set in.
And so the fact that Luther was there, I mean, he played a role, right, in the Enlightenment starting, just in terms of like being the theological voice. But what Luther managed to do was he made, and this was not maybe a foregone conclusion, because the Turks were knocking at the door too at the same time.
Yeah.
I mean, Europe could have become a Muslim.
Yeah.
But what Luther did was he injected some life and vitality into the kind of Christian project.
Yeah.
And because of that, I mean, they were able to hold off. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't think Vienna would have beaten the Turks if the Protestants hadn't come down from.
Wow.
Yeah, and
that's interesting, man.
There were a bunch of Lutherans that came down and helped fight them.
Well, instead of
then when they were done, the Viennese all kicked them out and said, "Oh, we hate you guys." You know, it's pretty funny, you know. But
and instead of killing the Turks, we just killed each other, the Protestant Catholic wars and all that stuff.
Yeah. So it's a complicated
we need an
history.
Enemy.
I don't want to oversimplify.
Sure. We were too busy killing each other that exactly. They didn't have time to get a foothold.
But I do feel very much like the vibe that I pick up from my life is a society that just kind of reached its point of final exhaustion. And so American Empire. Yeah. And so the real question is what's going to rise to take its place, and that's where I feel like a thinker like Kingsnorth is really interesting.
It's great.
You're right, but also again, I don't take him on his own terms because I think. I do feel like in his own way, he is kind of repristinating, like saying, let's go back and be orthodox.
We talked about this the other day, man, repristination, yes.
And I mean, and I feel like it's the exact wrong thing to do. And I feel like the Lutheran Church, if it wants to contribute to the moving forward of the kingdom, it has to lose its repristinating instinct and say, let's look to our own background. Let's look to our own culture. Mm-hmm. Let's look at the situation now and come up with something original and new.
This is good, man. I literally just was looking at the Repristination Press, the Lutheran publishing house that like puts out Gerhard and Quinstedt, and I got dudes in my church that love all this old school 17th century Orthodox nerd out theology, which is cool. But let's talk about this. Let's pivot here. I think this is a great topic, man. The church is called to like simultaneously always do two things: to maintain some tradition of the past, the Bible, the scriptures, whatever you want to do, but also translate it to modern day. In our catechumen, our adult confirmation class on Sunday, we talked about this exact thing, and we read the Messiah Creed. Are you familiar with the Messiah Creed? Okay, so the Messiah Creed is essentially a creed that was written in the 1960s. It was done by work of like Jesuit missionaries with tribal people called the Maasai people in Nigeria, I think, and it was written in order to do this, basically to convey the gospel to primitive tribal people who, when they read the Nicene Apostolic Creed or the Apostles' Creed, it didn't make any sense. So they and Google this Messiah Creed, or we could put it in the show notes maybe, but it's an amazing, quick little, follows the framework of the apostles, you know, the three articles, 1, 2, 3, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, and it's beautiful and it's simple and it's theologically profound. But that's the thing, is we had this whole conversation about how do we keep our faith alive and active now, where it makes sense to like people living here and now, while still honoring the past, because I think traditions tend to do one of extreme. The repristinators you're mentioning are maybe people in our church or the rad trads or whatever that want to like go back to some yesteryear of the golden age. Then their mind is like where all the magic was and everything was perfect, when of course that's naive and it's not real. It's fake, man. But then there's the other one that would say, the other extreme, let's embrace every technology, let's fill every square inch of our sanctuary with a screen, and give everybody AI tool. I mean, whatever, however you want to parse that, which is another extreme where you just jump in everything. That's foolish too. So talk about that a little bit. The balance of tradition and translation vis-a-vis, you know, pushing against the repristinators primarily, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I we'll have to think about that a little bit more in terms of in terms of you know, like current debates about what to do specifically in the church. Mm-hmm. I was thinking of it in terms of kind of just a larger, broader brush sort of understanding of, say, a guy like Paul Kingsnorth, like saying we should, you know, I found peace and continuity in the Orthodox Church. Maybe we should go back and do that. Yeah, and
which is popular right now.
And I don't have a problem with him being Orthodox. I do worry a little bit about anyone that, as you said, you know, comes off with the idea that, well, things were better in the old days.
Well, push against that line of thinking. I think it's popular right now. What's wrong with that, man? Come on. Everything was great in 1954 in the Lutheran Church. Let's go back there.
Well, first of all, it wasn't great. You mentioned it. You mentioned a few problems with it in the last podcast. You know, and I mean, there were definitely issues. The other thing is that, and I say this to people all the time, in my church and Bible classes, don't get too enamored of the past, because the past was how we got here.
What do you mean?
Well, how we are here because of the things that happened in the past. And, a new generation comes up, they see the situation on the ground. I mean, this is the complaint of every generation. And the younger folks come along,
Yeah.
and instead of just appreciating our greatness and how we solved all these issues, they assume they're solved and they start seeing other things.
Yes.
And that you can't stop that.
Yeah.
And so if you roll it back to the 50s, what would stop there being a flower generation and hippies and beatniks and all that sort of stuff again?
It's like some kind of quantum mechanic thing that says, like, you can't go back there. It's not going to be the same even if you could, right? I mean, but man, we're trying to make America great again. We're trying to make the church great again. Why can't we go back to some of it? Or should we not even try?
I think that and again, it gets back to my understanding of Spengler. Spengler talks about these civilizations that rise up, and they start out with kind of like an interstitial period, like where there's no really dominant civilization. And then the longing of some individuals, probably really clever, bright individuals, but maybe just very charismatic people that may not even be that bright. Mm-hmm. They're longing for something, and they latch on to an idea. And we talked, the Faustian one was the only one I mentioned.
Sure.
But he talks about the Apollonian civilization from the Greeks, and he talks about, and each one of these has their own sort of he reduces it all to a really simple concept. And he said this thing developed its own mythologies and its own set of ideas, and then in the end inspired its own arts, and had this huge creative project that built around it. And why do you think you would take the ideas from, say, the medieval time and then drop them back in now and expect that they would create more of the art? I mean, I think it's an unrealistic expectation.
Yeah.
I learned from my son, who knows a lot more about visual arts than I do. I've never been a fan, but my second son just loves them, and he pointed out to me, because I said, I noticed years ago that there's so much Christian art in the past, but the church only allowed Christian art. They said you can't paint your master, your patron. Unless it's just for their house. If it's going to be out in public, it's got to be some biblical scene. And so they would paint John the Baptist being rebuked, and they'd give John the Baptist the face of their patron,
who paid for the painting. Yeah.
Right, and they would also take that scene and they'd work in all kinds of stuff. But walking through the museum at Vienna, it was amazing, right? There was, this guy that just wanted to do some nudes, and he wanted something a little racy, so he painted Lot's daughters, and you have, and
it's in the Bible, man.
Right, exactly. But really, we want to go back to that, where it's like you can only paint biblical scenes and let people like play all these games to try and get around it. I don't think today people. They think they want to go back, but they don't really. I think that had its own set of pathologies that, in the end, eventually wound up bringing the whole thing down. And you just can't try and inject those in again. What we need to do in our current time is find out what the new ideas of the next civilization are going to be. If it's not Faustian anymore, when we've learned through postmodernism that knowledge has a dead end, and you can't just keep pushing it, because in the end you're just you're only just trying to improve your own situation, because we're all sort of corrupt creatures. I think that we have to build on that and say, all right, then if that's true, what is the germ of the next civilization, the thing that everyone gets excited about and moves around, and that's, I think the church played a role in the last two civilizations, in the medieval one and in the Faustian one too. In terms of a moderation in some sense, and then also kind of getting excited about it in other ways. And I do see our theological debates with the Reformed about the real presence. It just seems so quaint to me in our day to have John Calvin writing that, well, of course, a human body wouldn't be able to pass through walls, so he crawled through a hole in the attic, and it's like, that's your commentary on John 19, or John 20. It's crazy, right? But it seems quaint today, but it was a serious debate at the time, because they were saying, look, reason is gonna fix this for us, and
How's that going? How's that project work?
Yeah, how is it going, right? And it's not like we can just throw a reason out. I mean, that's
Sure, yeah.
But and it's very much sort of like this sort of Kingsnorthian maybe paradox in a way. It's like, I want a composting toilet, but I don't want like a cities full of factories. And it's like, well,
and people dying at the age of 29.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And so I think that a fascinating thing for us to do, and a part of the reason why I wanted to do this podcast, and because you're so much fun to talk to, but over time, let's think about what the ethos of the church ought to be in our time.
Well, it's interesting. You mentioned this last time or the time before, I don't remember, man, but when we talked so much, but like you can track the epochs, right? You got the pre-modern time, the time of the church. You go back to the biblical times, and then we got Reformation and modernity and Enlightenment, and everybody's still like, we're trying to, and postmodernism, right? But we're still trying to figure out what we're in now. We talked about this a little bit, like what the age of technology, information. I remember Ben Sass. He wrote a book one time, I forget what it was about. It was like basically about the changing generations, the vanishing of the American adult, I think is what it's called. And in that, he bemoans the youth, like we all do, like Socrates did, right? These lazy youth. But he made much in this book about like, we're entering this next realm, but what is this next era like? And so we got to figure out what it is first before we can figure out how the church can speak into it, I think, which brings me back to this technology thing, which I think this is so prescient for us to talk about. Like, we're at a place and a time of exponential technological growth every day. And I just think we need to be careful and thoughtful about what we embrace, what we engage, and what we don't.
Okay, I'm going to react to that. I think I like almost everything you said, but I'm going to latch on to one thing that I think I kind of disagreed with.
Okay.
And that was that we have to understand what the world is before we can speak to it.
Okay.
Because I think God knows, but I don't think we're ever going to know. And I think a lot of times you just don't understand the times you lived in until afterwards. It's the historians that figure it out after we're all dead.
Live forward, understood backwards.
And so, I mean, you think of Luther. I mean, he was by his own account primarily always motivated by the needs of his people in crappy little Wittenberg.
Yeah.
And he saw the indulgences. He was unhappy about what he thought was bad for them spiritually. And so he reacted to that. Mm-hmm. And he wasn't like saying, well, oh, there's this big, enlightenment going on and what's the world going to look like? And let me speak into that. He wasn't doing that at all. He was just saying, you know what, this is wrong. You can't do this. Yeah. And I feel like your comment about the technology is like something we should just act on, and just where does that wind up leading us? I mean, what kind of, if the ethos is to just try to control that, say, look, the guys that make the technology, they're not going to ever ask you to stop using it or to like turn it off after 10 o'clock.
Yeah.
Right. But we have people too. My own sons. I mean, but I have two sons that have limits on their phones. Like I have one son that can't even use YouTube more than an hour a day, and after that the timer goes off, and it's like a child control that he put on, and the password to override it, he doesn't even know it. He gave it to his friend. So awesome. If he really has some desperate need to use YouTube, he's got to call his friend on the phone and say, hey, I got to use YouTube. Can you give me the password? And
that's amazing.
And then he'll give him a new one because he doesn't trust himself not to doom scroll and not to waste a lot of time.
That's such a Kingsnorthian move. Shout out to your son.
But I'm just saying, don't you think maybe we should be preaching this to people?
Totally. Well, that's what I'm saying.
I mean, when Jesus says, if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off. Put a timer on your YouTube. It's causing you to sin. Yeah,
but to be clear, don't be like Origen. Don't really gouge out your eyes. But yes, I think it was Origen.
I would need a decapitation, honestly, if we were going to talk about removing body parts.
The whole thing, yes.
Yeah, so I mean,
all of it, the entire thing. But your point is right. So maybe we don't have to understand it, and you're right. That's such an arrogant thing for me to even say. Like we must analyze and understand every facet of the thing, and which part of the elephant are we holding on to, right? Kind of thing. You're right, and I think the Christian answer. And we're pastors, right? Like, you just tend your garden. Like, you take care of whoever's in front of you, which is the Christian answer. It's like so what do you do? Like, I got little kids. I raise my kids. I'm serving here at this church. I preach and talk. And I think that's the key too, is we address these issues. We address these issues in our teaching and our public interface and in our one-on-one conversations with people in our congregation, where we just say, look, this is, and I try to do it. And I think a lot of people are, right? But it's tricky because We don't want to like offend, and we don't want to think we're speaking outside of our purview as preachers on the text. But any good analysis of the Bible isn't just a Bible study of what the text says 2,000 years ago, but how it affects us now.
We just wrapped up the adult Bible class unit on 1 John, but it was 1 John with a twist, because they had wanted to talk about all this sexual identity stuff. Mm-hmm. This was like last fall, and there are a lot of questions about like transgender things and stuff. Like, does the Bible say anything about this?
Yeah.
And I said, well, not really. Because it just wasn't possible.
Wasn't really around,
it wasn't a thing, And so, but what I did tell them was that we can, what we can do is let's read 1 John and see if 1 John has anything to say about this. But I every single week I told them, and I raised this issue with them, the difference between exegesis and eisegesis. I said, I don't want to read things into the text. And I've given them warnings all the time about that. I said, look, there's some great books out there by some Christian authors that are pretty inspiring, but be a little bit leery of them if they use 7 different translations of the Bible, because it's like, I think he's shopping around for the one that best supports his point. So he started out with what he wanted to say. Yeah. And now he's finding a verse that supports that.
Induction.
That's classic eisegesis, right?
Yeah. Reading into it, yeah.
And getting it to say something it maybe doesn't really say. And so, we did find that 1 John actually says quite a bit about identity. Not directly about sexual identity or gender identity or whatever, but it says a lot about identity per se. And we were able to take those general things and apply them in some pretty interesting ways.
That's cool.
And so I think it was challenging for me, though.
Why?
Well, just because doing a book study is way easier. You just say, what does this verse say? And you just kind of deal with it on its own terms. What were they saying back when John was alive?
What did the original author intend?
All that. And that's something that I've been trained to do, and I kind of do it really well. But now to say, what about all the stuff I'm reading online? How does this apply to that? Yeah. It's just a lot more thought. Yeah. A lot more thought. But I do think it's out of those thoughts that something's going to rise up. And that's why I say I want to talk about, I want to be conscious about trying to come up with an ethos for the church. It's like, what? Things like in our first podcast I mentioned, I'd like to have a bias toward the real. And I don't want to
fully agree.
But it's not, and again, there's a little bit of tension there, because I don't mind, using some things that are manufactured or artificial. But I do think we should have the bias towards the real. I think it's really important, and I think part of the problem is that as human beings, we need to deal with this technology in ways that we didn't really anticipate. I can't ever get out of my head the idea of like birds that fly into glass pane windows. I mean, I've worked in places with these big windows, and every once in a while I hear it's clunk, and there's another poor bird on the
smashing
sidewalk.
Into it,
I mean, they just, their biology and their instinct does not allow them to understand what's going on with that window.
And self-correct in the community.
Right, exactly. and so, but we have to be better than that. But I feel I do feel like the social media is like one of those glass windows for us. I feel like a lot of people are smashing it in.
Oh, wow.
And let me ask one more topic, unless you got something you want to bring up.
No, I'm just thinking in terms of responding to your thing about how we as the church thinking, or just what is the next ethos of the church. That's a whole other bag of hammers that we should keep thinking about and talking about, and not understanding it, but to be able to like articulate, you're right. I think, and I think you're onto it, this preferential option for the real.
Oh, I mean, I think that would be a plank. That would be certainly be
absolutely.
A plank. Yeah.
And from there you can go, I mean, our sacramentology, our, understanding of love for the sake, all these, there's a million ways you can go, right? Jesus Christ as the source and summit of the universe. And there's a million ways you can go with it. But I think that, that's something for us to keep thinking about exploring, because I think that would be, just helpful. and the world out there is hungry and searching. So we should be able to speak into that. But yeah, go ahead, man. What were you gonna say?
Do you feel that the tension between the technology and trying to be real about things is one that is challenging for me?
What do you mean?
Well, on the one hand, I see that people respond to things, and they respond to videos, they respond to technology, and they have our attention spans get smaller and smaller all the time. So I just wonder how good how effective a sermon is by itself. And,
wow.
And it's like, what maybe I should be writing my sermons so that they can be divided into small pieces and then just release them on YouTube and Facebook, throughout the week, and just tell people, look, if you're a member of this congregation, I expect you to follow me and watch this stuff and
keep track throughout the week.
I want to be in your life every day and not just on Sundays, because Sundays just doesn't work anymore. And the reality was that in the old days, in the good old days, I mean, they did demand people come in the middle of the week.
Of course. Yeah.
And it was
daily mass, man, right? And some traditions in some parts of the world. Yeah.
Well, I mean, and even in my lifetime, I mean, at least in in Advent and Lent, go to church on Wednesday. Yeah. Or if you're Baptist, go to church on Wednesday all year.
Yeah, exactly right. Wednesday night group or church, and then the youth group meets and all of it. Yeah. No, I think that's what's funny is, man, is we got some young adult, this thriving young adult group at our church, and for the life of me as a pastor, like we've tried to do midweeks, and it's just hard to get people to come out. But these 20 to 30 year olds, man, they meet every Thursday, every single week, and there's 15 to 22, 23 of these kids sometimes on a big night, and they're just so hungry and desperate for community and connection. And maybe that's just because in their age cohort, it's weird to be a Christian, and so they need to galvanize themselves. Because when they go into the world, if you're a 27-year-old and you really believe this stuff, it's not like it was in 1955 where there was 90% of you, where it's very different now. So I don't know what it is, but it's funny that the younger folk in my parish are the ones that are looking at me like, come on, pastor, like more stuff at the church, more offerings, and not like programs, but like they need to build they need to fortify their spiritual life, and they acknowledge it. And you're right? We can never think that people that come to church for an hour and a half on Sunday morning, right, for a liturgy and Sunday school and whatever it is, if that's all your spiritual life is, and you go out into the world Monday through Friday, like the church can't compete with all the stuff you're getting Monday through Friday. Like you're gonna lose your faith if you think you can sustain it and keep it by coming to church once a week and running through the motions. So there's something to that, man. I don't know if it's podcast or if it's YouTube videos or what, but some kind of discipline.
I'm exploring that on my own. I'm just trying to figure out what I can do. I mean, and what a pastor can do, because it seems like there's just so much to do. And I feel the same way to a certain extent about the technology as I did when in my long sort of wrestling with why are all these non-denominational churches growing, and it's like, I need to increase the production value of the church, but I just couldn't afford to do it. It's like, look, this is what I can afford to do.
Yeah.
And so I'm just going to have to do the best job I can with what I'm able to do.
Yeah. It's funny, by the way, those guys preach for 45 minutes, and some of them have 1,000 people a week. That's a whole other conversation. Longer preaching.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure. That's
That's not it. Sure. Yeah. That's not it.
It's a little out of our sort of subject interest area. I mean, at least for the podcast.
Yeah.
I've been interested. I've got opinions, but when we talk about technology affecting people, the part that probably bothers me the most I'm reminded of when you talk about your youth coming in and young adults coming in on Thursdays, is that I don't know if you've seen the statistics, but friendship is in a terrible place in the United States.
I've heard this,
and the number of people that self-report as having no friends, it used to be like 26%, and now it's like up to way more than that.
I've heard this,
and it's worse among people that aren't college educated.
Wait, they have more friends or less friends?
They have fewer friends.
Really?
Yes.
I would think that would skew the other way. Wow.
And
wow.
And so, I mean, to me, I feel like this is almost like a Martin Luther indulgences kind of thing, where it's like we got to take up arms against this, because
fight it.
because I mean, I can't imagine. I do have plenty of friends myself, I'd say, and some people I know really have my back, and they would call me out if I started going the wrong way, and they have done that.
Mm-hmm.
And I just can't imagine living without that. And
wow.
and it's going to be a worse life outcome, and definitely a worse spiritual outcome. I mean,
totally.
No matter what ecclesiology you have, I mean, you can't just have a whole bunch of desert island Christians. We can't all just be on our own. And I feel like the social media is pushing us in that direction.
Yeah, there's a bunch of ways I could go with this, but I'm just thinking, like, in a way, this is a function of the atomization of the modern world, where before you lived in a community in a hut, and you could be a weirdo and not have any friends, but it didn't gonna last very long because they're gonna kick you out or kill you, right? Whereas now you can just be a 27-year-old guy living in your mom's basement, or I'm painting this kind of caricature picture, but this is a real thing where it's like you have this false, fake, made up community online. And I guess there's some connection, but you actually need to have real friends in real life. And I think it's maybe this is why, to the point of like these young people are like back to the real thing. They want real people to go talk to. And whether they're doing a Bible study or they're grabbing, food and beer afterwards, they want to connect. They want to commune with other humans. Yeah, I don't know about the data exactly, but you're familiar with the Harvard Happiness Study? It's the longest longitudinal study in American history. They track dudes from 1950 something when they're 5 years old, and they've tracked them their whole lives. Okay, it's the Harvard Happiness Study. You can Google it. And what's funny is they track these different socioeconomics, the whole thing. But the people that were the most successful, I mean, whatever the success index sequence you want to kind of talk about, the people that were just the happiest and the most content and just all around happy people were the people that had the closest and most deep friendships. Like, it goes that's the number one factor for longevity, for health. Did you have deep, meaningful, lasting relationships with other humans? Yeah, it's obvious, man. It's like an axiom, isn't it?
Yeah, everyone knows, but I mean, it's like one of these things that no one's really
talking about.
No one willing to do anything about it, and I mean, it's worthy of another topic. We probably talk about it more. The sort of the theology of friendship.
That's interesting, man. We're all over the place today, but it's good, man. I love this. We're popping left and right.
Yeah, let's. I think it's probably about good to wrap it up. At this point.
Wrap it up. No more. Response video, or whatever they're called, reaction video.
No more reaction video.
That's all right, man.
Okay, we'll catch you next time. Thank you for listening to the Half Glass Podcast. Please like and subscribe to get more of our content.